I think this is not an accident, the timing of this Hamas raid. It was supported by Iran. You couldn't have that degree of push from Hamas, the training, the armaments, the strategy, without the support of Iran. And so Iran has an interest in destabilizing relations that looked to be stabilizing. What do I mean by that? Of course, I mean the Saudi rapprochement, the normalization of relations between the Israelis and the Saudis, was really something that was happening. This would have been truly a watershed moment in Middle East relations. And the Iranians did not want that and do not want that. So the push by Hamas in this case, in a sense, proxies for Iran. That was one of the huge reasons that this was timed for this moment. There's also the undeniable fact that within Israel there is a schism, there's a split. There is the Netanyahu government that's trying to seize power by going around the judiciary. You know, we talked about it, we reported on it, we talked to Rothman about it, to essentially make them unaccountable to the Israeli judiciary. And within Israel, that has created huge protests. Think about the Trumpsters versus the, never Trumpsters. It was sort of in that world where you see the growth of an autocratic regime and those who want to beat back an autocratic regime. So even within the Israeli military, you had this break. You had this, I'm not going to serve if this stands, if this Netanyahu government goes around the Israeli judiciary. You had that going on in the Israeli military. So again, you have normalization of relations between Saudi and Israel in the offing. It was working toward a formalized agreement. And you have this schism within Israel itself that includes the military. If you will, a distraction such that it seemed to be an opportune moment for the move that was made. And lastly, it's being now widely reported that, and I can't remember whether we touched on this yesterday or not, that the Israelis were aware of all of these exercises that were essentially rehearsals for this Hamas terrorist attack. The largest terrorist attack, one-day attack in Israeli history. But they didn't take it seriously. They thought it impossible. They thought it literally something that Hamas would never do, that they would never take on the Israeli military in this fashion. They would never marshal these kinds of forces. So all of these exercises that they were apparently aware of, they didn't pay any attention to. I mean, when we talk about Israel's 9/11, you've heard it compared in all of these different ways. The one thing I would say about 9/11, there are two things I would say about 9/11 in regards to what happened in Israel. And then I want to play you a little bit what actually happened from reporters who were there on the ground. I think we've got a couple of good videos waiting. But let me just mention this because I think this is quite important and quite relevant, especially when you hear 9/11 talked about. In 9/11, in the case of 9/11, there was U.S. intelligence that told us what? Guys were taking planes and learning how to fly them without ever learning how to land them. The idea was to crash them. There was literal intelligence on this. And as you know, for a number of reasons, government agencies not talking. And also, no one took that seriously. No one took that threat seriously or paid attention to the documented threat that was in the U.S. But the second thing that 9/11 did was it produced a justification for a horrifying war, the Iraq War. That was the hook on which George Bush's administration hung invading Iraq. And I don't need to tell you what a bad idea that was. So I worry that this 9/11, if again it's talked about in that way, I don't know that it's a direct parallel, that this 9/11 for Israel could also produce a kind of vengeance, a kind of anger, and a kind of reflex charge by Israel into Gaza that gets us nowhere closer to peace in this region. And yet I also understand how difficult peace is to make with a terrorist group that is bent on your destruction, in the case of Israel. And they are a brutal terrorist group, as we're learning. The massacres, the beheadings of children, of baby. I mean, it's unspeakably awful. I mean, there's a cruelty on top of this general terrorism invasion, mowing down these festival goers, just as they ran, they were all mowed down. These are all innocent civilians, all of them. Here's the report from Israel a day later. Go ahead, Tony, please.
Expect that it would be like this, the horrors that I'm hearing from these soldiers. As I mentioned earlier, about 40 babies at least were taken out on gurneys. Still, right now, they're going house to house, still evacuating dead bodies, killed Israeli citizens who were killed.
I have to cut in. It's such a shocking, jarring statement there. And just for our viewers, we're in a new hour here on the broadcast who very likely weren't with us last hour to understand that you've come in there to find this small community littered with the dead and slaughtered bodies of Israeli civilians primarily, and you're saying 40 babies, dead babies.
That is what one of the commanders told me. And you continue to see just cribs overturned, strollers left behind, all of these doors wide open. He said, we don't know the exact number of casualties because they're still collecting dead bodies, still going door to door because the active fighting here just stopped. He said it came in waves almost. Every 20 minutes they thought maybe, okay, I think we finally cleared all the terrorists, and then 30 minutes later another cell would emerge. So it was ongoing, and even when they thought that it had finally ended, more terrorists popped out of nowhere, and that continues to be the scene now. It is under control now, and
that's good. I know
were they
Joe
at a child care center or something, all those children?
I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of kids. You have like I saw one family had 8 children, another family had 4 children. There was a so I don't know exactly what was going. They didn't mention a daycare center, but this is, what is this, Tony? I know Joe Biden is speaking right now. Kim will have details on that. Bottom of the hour. Go ahead, Tony. Let's.
I can get the Biden if you want me to. I can get it right now if you want.
Do you want to put up Biden for a moment?
I'll see what I can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not in a hurry to carry Biden simply because I feel there are a limited number of things that Biden is going to do. I think Biden is someone, and this is important. I mean, both Obama and Biden distanced themselves from Netanyahu a bit. I mean, I think that Biden is careful about what he says. On the other hand, this is such a brutal massacre that occurred on a large scale. And there are American and Israeli and maybe other nations involved in the hostages who are in Gaza right now and likely spread out all over Gaza.
It's different than the situation in Ukraine where they weren't militarily strong, because Israel is very strong militarily. So they may not need the same type of assistance that Ukraine needed. And so it seems like President Biden has came out at the very beginning and said the United States stands with Israel, but in the way of help, I don't know what they need from us. Because
they've asked for some weaponry, so they will probably get that. But I also think that this is, in a weird way, not your typical military incursion of the sort that we've seen with Russia and Ukraine. These aren't tanks coming across. These aren't planes coming across. Typically, this is a guerrilla incursion. Hamas is a guerrilla terrorist organization, so they expressly attack civilians. I mean, Hamas has been around for a long time, blowing up buses full of people, blowing up coffee shops in the afternoon. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they go after civilians, and they create civilian terror. One of the reasons Israel has a wall is because there was so much in the way of daily massacres in Israel with the blood on the hands of Hamas or Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad, etc. There are a number of them, but Hamas is the ruling group in Gaza. They had elections and elected Hamas. Now, I also think that the people in Gaza who are suffering terribly in this packed region that is, so very troubled, they likely don't even want Hamas there. I mean, I'm not suggesting that each and every person in Gaza wants Hamas. I'm just saying they're the controlling entity there. Vivian says this: most people do not want Hamas there. It's worse than Fatah under Arafat when he was in power. Yeah, this is a really interesting point that I was kind of making, that, I'm not saying that everybody, these are my words, I wasn't saying that everybody in Gaza wants Hamas. I don't think they do. I mean, I think Hamas is a terrorist organization that rules the streets there in the same way that Arafat was a mobster and he ruled Palestinians' interests with his own interests ahead. Arafat just squirreled away billions of dollars in Paris and in other places. Arafat took advantage, and Hamas is taking advantage of as well. And I think Vivian is right about that. This from Phineas: the Palestinians only have themselves to blame. They allowed and funded Hamas with U.S. and Israeli humanitarian aid to build bombs and tunnels to kill Jews instead of improving their situation. That states it in a way that's pretty blunt. It is true, though, that the money that has poured into Gaza has not gone to the Gazans, has not gone to the people living in Gaza. It has been used for things that have strengthened Hamas. It is true that tunnels and weaponry have been paid for with money that had been earmarked for other things. So that's not completely wrong at all. But Edward says this: why the F doesn't the U.S. acknowledge the killings of children in Gaza by air raids? It's sickening. That's from Edward. And this is the problem. You have this military operation with civilians who are everywhere in Gaza with nowhere to go. And even as the Israelis warn, we're going to bomb this building before they do it, the Gazans have, what options do they have? I mean, it's very, very disturbing. And yet, what options then do the Israelis have? You cannot countenance this kind of action on the part of Hamas, and Hamas runs Gaza. So where are they going to go? Back to Gaza. I see it as what I'd love to see is some legitimate peace talks. They're going to have to be peace talks anyway. Why can't we get there? And I know many of you would say, well, because Hamas is a terrorist organization, they don't want any peace talks. They want to rub out the last Jewish person from the earth. And they certainly want Israel gone. And how do you negotiate with them?
How do you ever achieve peace in that region between those two factions? I don't think you can.
Show me, this is the Israeli commander talking about how this reminded him the way the terrorists move from house to house, searching out people to slaughter, reminded him of the pogroms that he heard about from his grandparents, in which, was it Russians mostly, would go from town to town and just, they would kill Jews, they would, they would, can I say the R word? I mean, because that's what's happened here. There's been rape, there's been slaughter, it's been awful. In this most recent Hamas move into Israel. Here you go. Tony, play a little bit of it, if you would, please.
It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in the bedrooms, in the protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. It's a massacre. It's a terror activity. So you can look it about on yourself. It's something that I never saw in my life. It's something that we used to imagine as our grandfather and grandmother in the pogrom in Europe and other places. It's not something that happened in the new history, in the near history.
Yeah, this reminds him of the pogroms. It's tough not to be reminded of it as these Hamas terrorists go house to house. They literally used explosives to break open the safe rooms where families were hiding inside. And they massacred and raped and created terror. It's very hard for me to marshal anything but outrage over this. And yet eventually, with hostages weighing in the balance, some sort of reasonable strategy has to emerge. Now, the hostages are not just from Israel. As I mentioned, there are Americans involved.
As a matter of fact, President Biden just said in the speech that 14 Americans are, I believe, have been killed so far.
At least 11 U.S. citizens were killed. I guess the president has updated that to 14. But among the deaths, also Argentina, 7 Argentines have been killed. 15 are missing. Canada, 1 dead, 2 are missing. France, 8 French citizens killed, 20 missing. 10 Nepalese died in the attack. 4 Russian nationals are dead, 6 are missing. Thailand, 12 Thai nationals have been killed. The Thai government said it was working to confirm reports that as many as 18 Thai citizens have been killed. British man serving in the Israeli Defense Force killed. 2 Ukrainians have been killed. So, with hostages in the balance, what's the next move? It changes the dynamic in this region. It really does. And this is certainly something that Hamas knew. It's why they took hostages. What else do we have, Tony? Do I have anything? I'm running way late.
I want professor. You gave me the
professor. I might do Kim's news if it's okay.
Right. Sure, whatever you want to do.
Because I feel as though I'm getting so far behind, and I've got David coming up. But it's, look, to me, it's a front and center thing.
Yep.
It's so heartbreaking, and as I've told you, it's going on against a backdrop of a lot of war. I told you about this yesterday. I mean, this time in history is a time of tremendous instability. And so a stable hand is needed. And you even have significant anti-Semitism rising to the surface here in this country over the last couple of years. And this sort of thing unleashes more of it. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.